From stance breaks you never see to secret movement tech that turns cliffs into shortcuts. This is Elden Ring's biggest hidden mechanics explained. Hardness. Hardness is one of Elden Ring's biggest hidden mechanics because it can quietly turn a good weapon into dead weight, and the game never tells you it's happening. Most players discover this the same way, by walking into a tunnel feeling confident and immediately getting humbled by a guy with a pickaxe and the emotional stability of a brick wall. You swing, you hit, you hear that unmistakable metallic clank, and your character recoils like they just punched a statue. The enemy barely flinches. Sometimes the damage is tiny. Sometimes it feels like the hit didn't count at all, and either way you're now standing there in recovery frames like, cool, so I guess my sword is decorative. This shows up consistently with certain enemy types and situations. Miners and stone-like enemies in caves and tunnels who seem to ignore light slashes. Crystallized foes where fast weapons bounce more often than you'd expect. Heavily armored enemies where rapid attacks feel like you're tapping on a fridge door. Even some bosses or elite enemies that don't necessarily look hard, but behave like they have a hidden layer of resistance. Then you try something different, maybe by accident. You swap to a heavier weapon, or you stop spamming light attacks and throw out a jump heavy, a charged heavy, a guard counter, or an Ash of War that hits like a truck. Suddenly the enemy reacts. Staggers happen. Your hits stop bouncing. The fight feels normal again. What changed wasn't your level, your damage stat, or your build finally coming online. What changed was the type of pressure you applied. Elden Ring is treating certain enemies like they have a material threshold, and some attacks just don't pass it. This is where hardness becomes more than an annoying quirk. It becomes a design philosophy. Elden Ring isn't only asking how much damage are you doing, it's also asking, does this attack meaningfully interact with what you're hitting? In other words, are you cutting flesh, or are you trying to slice a gemstone with a butter knife? Hardness works like an invisible gatekeeper for impact and reaction. If your attack doesn't meet a hidden threshold, the game can reduce how much the hit matters in practical terms. Less stagger, less interruption, less control. That's why some fights feel like you're losing, even when your damage numbers don't look terrible. The enemy isn't being tanky in the normal RPG sense. The enemy is resisting your physical approach. This is also why players often misdiagnose the problem. They'll say, this enemy is overtuned. My build is weak. I need to grind runes. And sometimes, sure, leveling helps, but hardness creates a different kind of difficulty. Mismatch difficulty. You brought the wrong tool for the job, and Elden Ring won't politely tell you. It will let you figure it out the old-fashioned way, by bouncing off something until you feel silly. Once you understand hardness, a lot of Elden Ring's weird moments click into place. Why jump attacks feel so reliable even when they're risky. Why charged heavies suddenly seem worth the commitment. Why blunt, darn impact heavy playstyles feel rebound. Rebound is one of Elden Ring's sneakiest mechanics because it turns your aggression into the thing that gets you punished. Your attack doesn't just fail, it actively hands the enemy a turn. Most players think of bouncing as a visual effect. You hit something hard, it makes a clank, you keep fighting. Elden Ring makes it more sinister than that. When rebound triggers, it's not just a sound cue. It changes the flow of the fight. Your character enters a recoil animation, your recovery is longer than expected, and for a brief moment, you're locked in place like the game is politely saying, thanks for swinging, now stand still and reflect on it. You see rebound in a few common situations. Hitting shields with light attacks, especially against disciplined humanoid enemies who block often. Striking rigid enemies, stone, crystal, heavily armored targets, where the impact feels dead. Attacking at bad angles, like clipping a wall or striking a weapon guard hitbox instead of the body. Spamming light strings into defenses where each hit becomes less a threat and more a donation of stamina and safety. And the important detail is that rebound tends to show up most when you're doing what a lot of players naturally do in panic. Keep swinging because more hits, Chaktoars more pressure. Elden Ring replies with, not always. Sometimes more hits. Sacrifice more chances for you to bounce and get countered. It becomes especially obvious against enemies with strong defensive posture. Knights, soldiers with shields, anything trained. You tap their guard with a light weapon and your blade ricochets, and suddenly they respond with a quick thrust, a kick, or a guard counter of their own. The exchange doesn't feel like I attacked and they defended. It feels like I attacked and the game gave them permission to hit me. Rebound exists for one reason, to enforce quality over quantity. Elden Ring is not a game where constant contact is automatically good. It's a game where contact has to be meaningful. Rebound is the hidden system that stops combat from becoming a mindless DPS race, because it punishes the idea that speed alone should break defenses. It also changes what defense means. In many RPGs, blocking is passive. You reduce damage, maybe lose some stamina. End of story. In Elden Ring, defense can be active control. A shield isn't just a barrier, it's a tool that can disrupt your tempo. That's why some enemies feel smarter than they actually are. The AI isn't necessarily brilliant, it's just using systems that force you into bad recovery states if you attack carelessly. Once you understand rebound, a lot of mystery deaths become obvious in hindsight. You didn't die because you were too weak. You didn't die because the enemy was too fast. You died because you created a punish window with your own swing. And this is where rebound becomes psychologically nasty. It trains you to hesitate, but not in a safe way. It trains you to hesitate in a game where hesitation also gets you killed. So the real skill becomes choosing when to commit, not attacking more, attacking better. That's why certain moves feel like they ignore the rules. Jump heavies, charged heavies, guard counters, some ashes of war. They carry enough force and posture pressure to prevent rebound situations. Or at least to make the trade worth it. They're not just higher damage, they're higher authority. They tell the game, this hit matters. Rebound is the opposite. Rebound is the game telling you that hit didn't deserve to matter. And once you notice that, you start playing differently. You stop treating shields as annoyances and start treating them like hazards. You stop flailing at stone enemies and start thinking about impact, stance pressure, positioning. You stop asking, how do I hit them more? And you start asking, how do I hit them in a way that counts? And if rebound teaches you that force has rules, the next mechanic is even colder, because it proves the world itself can change the rules mid-fight based on rain, water, and the environment you're standing in. Weather scaling. Yes, the rain is secretly participating. Weather is one of Elden Ring's biggest hidden mechanics because it can quietly buff or nerf your build mid-fight without changing your stats, your gear, or the enemy's level. Most players only notice weather as mood. Storm rolling in, puddles forming, everything looking cinematic right before you get folded in half. But the game is doing more than setting a vibe. When it's raining, or when you're fighting in shallow water, lightning damage becomes more effective against wet targets, while fire damage becomes less effective against wet targets. You can see it in situations that feel oddly inconsistent until you realize what's happening. You throw lightning at an enemy in the rain, and it hits harder than you expected. You cast fire or rely on fire-leaning weapon damage, and it suddenly feels a little soft. You fight near water, and lightning builds start feeling like they're cheating, even though you haven't changed anything on your character sheet. This is especially noticeable because Elden Ring doesn't give you a little floating text like wet target plus 10% lightning damage the way other games would. It just happens, quietly, like you were supposed to figure it out yourself. And the funniest part is that it's not just rain good for lightning, it's the context around the target. Water and wetness matter, which means terrain choice matters too. Where you stand, where the enemy stands, and whether the fight is happening in a puddle, a stream, or a full downpour. This mechanic is terrifying for one reason. It turns the environment into an invisible build modifier. Most games treat damage as a math problem. Stats plus weapon plus buffs works result. Elden Ring adds a layer of reality simulation on top. It's not asking only what element are you using, it's asking what conditions are you using it in. That changes how you read encounters. A boss doesn't have to be resistant to your element for your element to suddenly feel worse. The weather can take credit for that. And because it's subtle, players often misattribute the outcome to something else. Maybe I'm underleveled. Maybe this boss is tankier than I thought. Maybe my build fell off. Sometimes the answer is simpler. Your favorite element just got nerfed by the sky. And once you realize weather matters, you start seeing Elden Ring as a world with shifting rules rather than a static arena. You're not only optimizing your gear, you're optimizing your conditions. Lightning builds start feeling like opportunists. They don't just scale with faith or dex or seals. They scale with, is it currently miserable outside? Fire builds start feeling like they have to work harder for the same results whenever the world is damp. It also creates a quiet layer of tension. You can't control the weather, and you can't always control the terrain, which means some fights are subtly tilted before you even swing. Elden Ring never explains this clearly because it doesn't want it to be a checklist. It wants it to be something you discover by feeling that something is off, like your spells are slightly stronger than they should be, or slightly weaker than they were yesterday. And once you learn it, you start making decisions you didn't know were available. Do I want to fight this thing in the rain? Do I pull them into the water? Do I swap elements because the environment is against me? That's why this mechanic belongs in biggest hidden mechanics. It doesn't just change damage, it changes planning. And if weather proves the world can quietly tilt combat in your favor, the next mechanic gets even creepier, because it changes what the world is willing to spawn and how dangerous it becomes, based on something as simple as what time it is. Nighttime modifiers. Night in Elden Ring isn't just visual flavor. It's a hidden mode change that alters what can spawn, what can ambush you, and how profitable certain fights can become. The clearest proof is that several field bosses only appear at night, meaning the game literally withholds content unless you change the time. Knight's Cavalry cavalry are explicitly night-only encounters. Deathbirds also only show up at night, and the same is true for bell-bearing hunters. That's not a player theory. It's a spawn condition, and it doesn't stop at bosses. At night, regular enemies can spawn with glowing golden eyes, and those golden-eyed versions drop significantly more runes, commonly described as Daf5x. This is one of those mechanics players discover by accident. You kill a random soldier, the rune payout is absurd, and you stand there for a second like you just found a money glitch that the devs forgot to patch. The game gives you the tools to manipulate this too. Resting at a site of grace lets you pass time specifically to night, and the night-only bosses are designed around that loop. So, the cycle isn't decorative, it's functional. What makes this mechanic hidden is how Elden Ring frames it. Most open-world games treat day-night as atmosphere. Elden Ring uses it as a soft difficulty dial and a content gate. If you travel at night, you're opting into a world that can suddenly replace an empty road with a boss encounter that simply did not exist 10 seconds earlier. That changes player behavior in a very specific way. It teaches caution without tutorializing it. You start associating night with uncertainty, not because the screen is darker, but because the rulebook gets thicker. Suddenly, you're not just thinking, can I win this fight? You're thinking, is the game about to introduce something new here? It also reframes farming and exploration. The GoldenEye enemies aren't guaranteed, but the chance means nighttime can be meaningfully more rewarding if you're already clearing areas. So night becomes this uneasy bargain. More danger, more opportunity, and a higher chance that the world throws something at you that you weren't planning for. That's why nighttime in Elden Ring feels different, even when nothing happens. The tension comes from the knowledge that the game is now allowed to do things it couldn't do during the day. And if the night cycle proves the world has hidden switches, the next mechanic is one you can trigger on demand: crystal darts. And the moment enemies start fighting their own team. Crystal darts. Crystal darts are one of Elden Ring's most overlooked mechanics because they don't just deal damage, they can force certain enemies to malfunction and attack each other, turning a fight you're losing into a fight you barely have to participate in. On paper, crystal darts look like a simple thrown item. You toss them, they deal a bit of damage, maybe you forget they exist forever. Very normal inventory behavior. But the real function only shows up against specific enemy types: construct, Hadradash, golem-style enemies, with common examples being imps and burial watchdogs. After you land enough darts, these enemies can malfunction, shown by a visible reaction, often described as sparks, erratic behavior, and then they start attacking other enemies instead of focusing you. This is why players randomly discover it in catacombs and feel like they unlocked a cheat code by accident. You're struggling in a tight hallway with multiple imps, you throw a few darts out of desperation, and suddenly, the room becomes a WWE tag match where you're the referee. The key detail is that it usually takes more than one dart to trigger. One toss might do nothing noticeable. A handful, spaced quickly, is when the "wait, why are they turning around?" moment happens. This mechanic matters because it changes the way Elden Ring thinks about difficulty. Most hidden mechanics are about damage math. This one is about control. Elden Ring is brutal when you're forced into straight-up trades, especially in enclosed areas where multiple enemies can pressure you at once. Crystal darts offer a way to break that pressure without needing perfect parries, flawless spacing, or a build that deletes mobs instantly. Instead of out-damaging the encounter, you reprogram it, and that's why it feels so satisfying. It's not just stronger, it's smarter. The game's deadliest situations often come from being outnumbered or being forced to fight on the enemy's terms. Crystal darts flip that script by creating chaos inside the enemy formation. It also rewards players who pay attention to enemy identity. Elden Ring loves categories. Beasts behave differently than soldiers. Soldiers differently than knights. Knights differently than things that probably shouldn't be moving. Crystal darts are basically a reward for recognizing, oh, you're not a living creature, you're a system, which makes the mechanic feel almost thematic. You're not poisoning them, you're not charming them, you're triggering a malfunction. The enemy isn't afraid, it's broken. And once you realize a simple throw item can do that, you start looking at the rest of your inventory differently, because Elden Ring hides a lot of power in tools that look insignificant. And if crystal darts prove you can win fights by making enemies misbehave, the next hidden mechanic is even more practical, because it lets you keep your defenses up while still using your weapon skill like nothing's in your left hand. Shield Ash of War, aka why your weapon skill mysteriously disappears the moment you equip a shield. One of Elden Ring's most useful hidden mechanics is that your shield can silently override your weapon skill, and the fix is an Ash of War that does the opposite of what you'd expect. It removes your shield skills, so your right-hand skill becomes the default. If you've ever equipped a shield and suddenly thought, wait, why can't I use my Ash of War anymore? You've already run into the rule. By default, when you press the skill button, Elden Ring prioritizes the left-hand skill if your offhand has one. Common examples: parry, shield bash, etc. That means your right-hand Ash of War doesn't vanish, it just gets pushed behind whatever skill your shield is carrying. The blue word mechanic you screenshotted is usually solved by a specific Ash of War. No skill. Its description is very direct. The offhand armament has no skill, and if the other hand has a skill, that skill will be used instead. In plain English, put no skill on your shield. And now, the skill button will trigger your right hand Ash of War while you keep your shield equipped. That's why so many players feel like they unlocked their build the moment they learn this. You can keep a shield up for safety, keep your weapon one-handed for your moveset, and still use your weapon skill on demand instead of having to two-hand mid-fight. It's also confirmed that no skill can be applied to shields/torches that accept Ashes of War. Not every shield does. This matters because it changes how Elden Ring expects you to pilot your character. Without this mechanic, the game subtly pushes shield users into an awkward rhythm. If you want to use your weapon skill, you often have to two-hand the weapon first, then swap back to shield when you're done, and try not to get punished during the little animation dance. That's not hard in a skillful way. It's clunky, especially in fights where you need quick access to a weapon skill for spacing, burst damage, stance pressure, or a defensive escape tool. No skill removes that friction. And the reason it feels like such a big deal is that Elden Ring builds aren't just stat sheets, they're systems. If your build revolves around a particular Ash of War, Lion's Claw, Square Off, Unsheath, Flaming Strike, whatever, losing instant access to it isn't a minor inconvenience. It changes your whole tempo. It can turn a confident setup into a hesitant one. No skill also creates a really interesting trade-off that keeps the mechanic fair. You gain consistent access to your right-hand skill, but you give up your shield's own skill in exchange. So it's not a free upgrade. It's a decision about identity. Do you want shield utility, parry, bash, etc., or do you want your weapon skill available at all times? That single choice is why this mechanic is hidden but huge. It quietly determines whether shield play feels restrictive or smooth, and the game never sits you down to explain why your skill button started behaving differently. It just expects you to notice, experiment, and solve it. And once you realize Elden Ring hides power in rules, it never explains. The next mechanic gets even more paranoid, because sometimes the wall in front of you isn't a wall. It's a test of how sure you are about the rules you think you understand. Illusory walls. Illusory walls are a hidden mechanic that does more than hide loot. They make you doubt the environment itself, and Elden Ring deliberately keeps that doubt alive. Elden Ring has classic From Software-style illusory walls, surfaces that look solid until you hit them and they vanish, revealing a hidden room or passage. But what pushed this mechanic into global legend status was the infamous Volcano Manor wall that required an absurd number of hits to dispel, something players initially treated like a cruel secret. Multiple outlets later reported it was actually a bug/glitch, and that it was addressed in patch 1.4, effectively ending the era of what if every wall has 9,999 HP. Paranoia, in other words, the game accidentally trained players to mistrust every flat surface, and then, even after it was fixed, the habit stuck. This is why fake walls matter as a big hidden mechanic. They're not just secrets, they're behavioral conditioning. Most games teach you a reliable rule. If it looks suspicious, interact once. Elden Ring teaches a worse rule. Even when you think you understand the rule, you might still be wrong. The multi-hit wall incident, even if it was unintended, permanently changed how players approach exploration. It turned curiosity into suspicion. And the result is uniquely Elden Ring. You walk into a quiet hallway, and instead of feeling safe, you start scanning for lies. You see an empty corner, and your brain asks, empty by accident or empty on purpose? You notice a wall that feels too plain, and your weapon suddenly becomes a metal detector. The most effective horror isn't a jump scare, it's uncertainty. Fake walls turn architecture into uncertainty. And that's why the mechanic spreads globally. Every player eventually learns the same irrational ritual, bonk wall, just in case. And once Elden Ring has you doubting the world's surfaces, the next mechanic feels like the game throwing you a lifeline, because it gives you a way to test danger without dying first. Rainbow stones. Rainbow stones are a hidden exploration mechanic because they let you test whether a drop will kill you, without risking your runes, your time, or your patience. The game's own item text frames them as markers, but also explicitly says they can be dropped to gauge the distance of a fall, with the sound indicating how likely the fall is to be fatal. In practice, players use them like a safety probe. Toss one off a ledge you're considering. If it shatters on impact, that drop is lethal. If it lands normally, and you hear the safer cue, you've got a survivable descent. Multiple guides describe the same core function. The stone breaking is your don't jump verdict. That sounds small until you remember what Elden Ring actually is. A game full of vertical drops, bait messages, and shortcut ledges that look safe right up until gravity turns you into a lesson. This mechanic matters because it changes exploration from guessing into decision-making. Elden Ring's world is designed to make height feel tempting. There are ladders you don't see, tunnels tucked under cliffs, rooftops that look like they connect, until you commit and realize you misread the distance by about one entire life. Rainbow stones give you a way to verify risk without lowering tension. The game still doesn't tell you it's safe. It lets you test it. That's a big difference. You're not being protected by a UI warning. You're being rewarded for caution and curiosity. It also quietly reshapes how you treat other players' messages. Because Elden Ring has a global culture of, let's call it, community-driven cliff jumping. Rainbow stones are basically the developer-approved countermeasure to being emotionally manipulated into becoming a pancake. And the most Elden Ring detail of all is that the item used to be for children, according to the flavor text, which means the lands between is so absurdly dangerous that even kids needed a tool like this. So, yeah, rainbow stones aren't just cute, glowing pebbles. They're the game admitting, quietly, you will misjudge height. Here's your one civilized option. And now that you've got a pebble that tells you whether a drop will turn you into a pancake, let's talk about what to do when the danger isn't below you. It's sprinting at you with a sword, because guard counters let you block one hit and immediately hit back like you've had enough guard counters. Guard counters are one of Elden Ring's biggest hidden-in-plain-sight mechanics because they turn blocking from passive survival into an aggressive, stance-breaking weapon. Bandai Namco's own starter guide explains the input very plainly. Guard an enemy attack, then press R2 or RT immediately afterward to perform a guard counter, and it notes this counterattack can easily break the enemy's stance. In practice, that lines up with what players feel when they accidentally do it the first time. You block a hit, you swing back instantly with a heavy retaliatory strike, and suddenly the enemy reacts like you hit them with something far more serious than a normal heavy attack. It's also one of the few techniques that naturally fits into defensive playstyles without forcing you to turtle forever. You can keep a shield, absorb a hit, and immediately create momentum, especially against fast humanoid enemies that love to poke and retreat. This matters because Elden Ring quietly rewards controlled aggression more than raw damage. Blocking alone keeps you alive, but it doesn't solve the fight. Guard counters do. They let you convert a moment of defense into a moment of dominance. One clean, intentional retaliation that can push enemies toward a stance break rather than letting them endlessly reset the tempo. It also changes how you read enemy attack patterns. Instead of thinking, I have to dodge everything, you start thinking, which hits are safe to block so I can punish them? That's a different mindset, more strategic, less frantic, and it makes many encounters feel less like chaos and more like timing. Most importantly, guard counters give you a reliable answer to a very Elden Ring problem: enemies that pressure you with repeated strings. Dodging those strings perfectly is hard. Blocking one hit and countering at the right moment is often the cleaner solution, especially early game when your stamina and survivability aren't fully developed. So guard counters aren't just a combat trick, they're a philosophy. You don't have to avoid pressure, you can redirect it. And once you realize Elden Ring lets you break stance straight out of a block, the next mechanic reveals the other side of that same idea, because there's an attack type designed to crush posture even faster without needing a shield at all: power stancing. Two-sword attacks are one of Elden Ring's biggest confirmed hidden mechanics because equipping two weapons doesn't just give you two weapons, it unlocks an entirely different attack pattern that can reshape how your build functions. Bandai Namco's official Elden Ring starter guide states it directly. Pressing L1-LB when both hands are equipped with weapons of the same category triggers a special attack. That sentence is doing a lot of work, because it means the game isn't treating dual wielding as right-hand weapon plus left-hand weapon. It's treating it as a stance, a different mode with a different moveset. You can test this instantly. Equip two straight swords, then press L1. You get a paired combo that isn't available with either sword alone. Equip a mismatched pair, like a katana and a straight sword. Press L1. The special paired attack doesn't trigger, because they aren't the same weapon category. So the key is not dual wielding, it's matching categories. This matters because Elden Ring builds aren't defined only by stats, they're defined by movesets. Power stancing gives you access to a moveset that tends to apply pressure differently than one-handed attacks. You're not just hitting twice, you're changing timing, spacing, and how quickly you can overwhelm an enemy's ability to respond. And that has ripple effects. It changes what good stamina management looks like, because L1 chains can chew through stamina if you treat them like normal attacks. It changes how status builds feel, because multi-hit patterns can apply effects more quickly when you're landing more contact per opening. It changes your risk profile because committing to a longer paired animation can be powerful, but punishable if you choose the wrong moment. Most importantly, it's a mechanic that many players miss, because Elden Ring doesn't frame it as a separate system. You don't get a tutorial pop-up that says, "Congrats, you unlocked power stance mode." You just get a new attack when you press L1. And if you don't experiment, you might never realize your character has an entirely different kit available. It also reframes loot. Finding a second weapon of a type you like isn't just redundancy, it's access. A second matching weapon can fundamentally fundamentally change your combat identity. And once you realize Elden Ring hides entire movesets behind simple equipment rules, the next mechanic proves it's doing the same thing with exploration, because there are places you're only meant to reach if you understand how the world launches you. Spirit Springs. Spirit Springs are secretly one of Elden Ring's most powerful traversal mechanics because they let you treat lethal drops like they're nothing, as long as you land into the spring on Torrent. Bandai Namco's official starter guide explains Spirit Spring jump directly. When you're on horseback near a Spirit Spring, you can ride its current high into the air, and more importantly, you won't take damage from jumping into a Spirit Spring while on horseback, even from a great height. That line is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It means Spirit Springs aren't just jump pads. They're safe landing zones that let you descend from heights that would normally delete you, without needing a talisman, a spell, or a perfectly timed anything. The game is explicitly granting you a vertical shortcut, and then trusting you to notice how busted it is. This matters because it changes how you read the open world. Most games design cliffs as borders. Elden Ring uses them as puzzles. Is this a dead end, or is this a route you're not seeing yet? Spirit Springs are one of the few mechanics that turn exploration into controlled risk, rather than blind faith. Once you internalize this rule, you start playing the world differently. You stop treating steep drops as probably death. You start looking for Spirit Springs as escape routes, shortcuts, and sequence breaks. You start understanding that Elden Ring's verticality isn't decoration. It's a navigation system. And as an ending note, it's perfect, because it feels like the game briefly drops the brutality and says, alright, you earned one nice thing, use it. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, click the video on screen now.